There is a small moment inside every mind that almost no one notices, a moment so subtle we pass over it without thought. It exists in the breath between one thought ending and the next one beginning. A thin, quiet space that feels empty at first, like a pause without purpose. But if you pay attention long enough, you begin to sense something living there, something older than memory, deeper than emotion, and calmer than anything you usually feel. Most people never reach it, not because it's hidden, but because we fill it with noise before it has a chance to reveal itself. And yet, in that quiet space, in the silence between two thoughts, wisdom often waits. We spend most of our lives trying not to be alone with our own minds. Even when nothing is wrong, the mind finds a way to create movement, like a river that refuses to stay still. The moment one thought dissolves, another rushes in to take its place. Plans, regrets, imaginary conversations, small worries dressed as big ones. Noise that doesn't sound like noise because we've lived with it for so long. For many people, silence feels unfamiliar, almost threatening. It reminds us of the things we haven't resolved, the questions we've avoided, the emotions we haven't named. So we distract ourselves with endless activity, checking, scrolling, planning, comparing, rehearsing, replaying. It's not that we prefer the noise, it's that the silence feels too honest. There is a story told in different ways throughout the world. A person goes into a quiet room intending to rest, but instead of peace, they are overwhelmed by the volume of their own thoughts. They leave within minutes, convinced the room is too loud, when in truth, the noise is inside them. This is the struggle. The mind fears the emptiness between thoughts because it cannot control what rises from deeper stillness. And so we rush to fill the space, even at the cost of clarity. Most people never realize that the discomfort is not a flaw. It is the beginning of understanding. There is a reason the mind resists quiet. A thought gives you something to stand on, something to identify with. I need to fix this. I should have done better. What if things go wrong? Thoughts become a kind of shelter, even when they are painful, because they keep you from feeling the softer truths underneath. Silence, on the other hand, does not give you anything to hold. It asks nothing of you. It is simply there, spacious and open, waiting. And in that openness, the mind loses its usual sense of control. That is why it creates noise. But here is the gentle truth. The silence between thoughts is not empty. It is where the mind renews itself. In that space, the mind is not reacting, not defending, not predicting. It is simply present. And presence has a way of dissolving confusion without force. Think of a lake after a storm. For a while, the surface is chaotic, waves crashing, debris floating, the water unable to settle. But if the wind softens, even for a moment, the lake begins to still on its own. Not by effort, not by force, simply because nothing is disturbing it. The mind is the same. When there is a pause between thoughts, when the internal wind stops for even a brief moment, clarity rises the way calm water returns to its natural state. This understanding does not come from theories or techniques. It comes from noticing that silence has been there all along, patient and unconditional, waiting for us to stop running. The shift happens quietly, almost unnoticed. It begins when you stop trying to escape the quiet moment between two thoughts and instead let yourself lean into it, gently, without pressure. You're not chasing silence. You're not forcing stillness. You're simply noticing the space that appears when a thought ends. At first it feels small, like a brief clearing in a dense forest. But the more familiar it becomes, the more you realize that the forest was never the problem. It was the fear of stepping into the clearing. Soon, you begin to sense something you couldn't before. The thoughts were never the enemy. It was the pace of them. When thoughts come one after another without pause, life becomes a blur, a rush of impressions with no room to understand them. But when the noise slows, even slightly, you begin to hear your own truth with surprising clarity. You realize that many decisions you labeled as urgent were simply noise trying to fill the silence. That many worries were echoes from old fears, not reflections of current reality. That many conflicts needed space, not solutions. The shift is this: you stop treating silence as absence and start welcoming it as presence. A presence that listens before it speaks, observes before it reacts, understands before it chooses. This small shift changes the entire rhythm of your life. Not dramatically, not loudly, but deeply. This truth shows up in quiet, almost invisible ways. You notice it when you pause before responding in a conversation and suddenly understand what the other person is actually trying to say. You notice it when you finish a long day and let yourself sit in stillness for a moment before reaching for the next source of stimulation. You notice it in the early morning, when your thoughts have not yet organized themselves, and you feel a rare sense of spaciousness before the day begins. It shows up in small decisions, choosing to breathe before reacting, choosing to wait before assuming, choosing to observe before concluding. Not because someone told you to, but because the silence between thoughts has begun to feel familiar, even comforting. You start to recognize that the mind does not need to be constantly busy to be alive. It can rest without becoming empty. It can be quiet without losing its intelligence. In fact, its deepest intelligence emerges only when the noise softens. Little by little, life becomes less of a mental race and more of a steady rhythm. You find yourself speaking more softly, listening more fully, and moving through experiences with a sense of grounded presence rather than hurried reaction. You begin to trust that clarity will come on its own, the way sunlight spreads slowly across a room in the morning, naturally, without effort. And as you grow comfortable with the quiet, you discover something unexpected. The silence you once feared has become the place where you feel most like yourself. Not the self shaped by expectations or self-criticism or endless planning, but the self that simply exists, aware, humane, steady. The noise between thoughts no longer feels like an enemy. It becomes a signal, a reminder to pause, to breathe, to let life settle before you choose the next step. In the end, the mind is not asking for perfection, only space. And in the quiet space between two thoughts, the wisdom you've been searching for quietly rises to meet you.